Hey, how's everyone doing? In this video, you will learn how to add, subtract, and multiply complex numbers. Two key facts that you will need to know when multiplying complex numbers are, one, the fact that the square root of -1 equals I, which is something that we covered already in class, and also this fact over here that I'm circling, that I squared equals -1. Again, these are things that we've gone over in class already. Again, but these ideas are extremely important when we start to multiply complex numbers together. So let's keep those facts in mind as we work our way through these 6 examples. All right, so let's take a look at problem number 1. All right, so what we're asked to do here is to add 12 minus 11i, which is a complex number, plus -8 plus 3i, which is another complex number. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to add the real parts together. So in this case, we want to add 12 plus -8. And then what we're all going to do next is we're going to add the imaginary parts together. So that's going to give us plus -11i plus 3i. All right, and we're just going to add these together as if they were like terms. So let's go ahead and do that. So 12 plus -8 is +4. And then in the parentheses here, we have -11i plus 3i, which is -8i. So I'm just going to write that as 4 minus 8i. So again, your rule of thumb here is when you're adding or subtracting complex numbers, you want to add the real parts together. And then you also want to add the imaginary parts together. So let's take a look at a second example. Let's look at problem 2. All right, so here's a little bit different because it's subtraction, so we just need to be careful. Now, what I like to do here when I see this subtraction symbol, I like to distribute it, like almost like we're distributing a -1 through parentheses, and then rewrite the problem. So that's what I'm going to do here. So 15 minus 9i, and then -1 times 24 is -24, and then -1 times -9i is plus 9i. And then what we're going to do is we're going to approach this just like we did example number 1. So we're going to locate the real parts, which in this case are 15 and -24. We're going to add those together, and that's going to give us -9. And then we're going to add the imaginary parts together. Oops, let's undo that and get the highlighter. The imaginary parts, so -9i plus 9i. And in this case, that is just 0. So -9 plus 0 equals -9. So when we added those two complex numbers together, the result ended up being -9. Okay, I'm just going to scroll up. And now what we're going to do is take a look at another example, example number 3. And again, the exact same approach as on the previous examples. This one's plus. So I'm really just going to, again, add the parts together. So -6 plus -7 is -13. All right, so I'm adding the real parts together. And then the imaginary parts, let's do it different, would be -8 and +8. So again, those zeroed out, so we ended up with -13 plus 0, and -13 plus 0 is just -13. All right, so those are just 3 quick examples on how we could, or how we add or subtract complex numbers. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some problems where we're actually going to multiply imaginary and complex numbers together, or complex numbers times complex numbers. So let's take a look at example number 4. So example number 4, we're taking a pure imaginary number and we're multiplying that times a complex number. And all we're going to do here is use the distributive property. And this is where we're going to need to start taking into account the facts that I talked about earlier on in this video. And that is the fact that I squared is equal to -1. So you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. So let's go ahead and distribute. So -5 times 8 is -5i times 8 is -40i. And then -5i times negative 9i is going to be positive negative, so 5 times 9 is 45, so positive 45, and I times I is I squared. And this is where we need to make a replacement. So I squared, remember, as we talked about up on the top, I squared is equal to negative 1. So we're going to replace I squared with negative 1. So it's going to be negative 40i plus 45 times negative 1. Now what I'm going to do is write my final answer as a complex number, which has the real part first, followed by the imaginary part. So grab a different color here. This is the real part. Positive 45 times negative 1 is negative 45, which I'm going to write first. And then negative 40i is going to come second, so minus 40i. So again, anytime we see I squared, we're going to replace that with negative 1 because I squared is equal to negative 1. All right, a couple more examples. Okay, example number 5. This is the first time where we actually see a complex number being multiplied times a complex number. And what I mean by that is a complex number in the form a plus bi. So here all we're going to do is we're going to use that FOIL pattern to help us out. So negative 8 times 4 is negative 24. Negative 8 times negative I, negative 7i rather, is 56i. Then we'll do the next two terms, so plus 8i, and then minus 14i squared when we multiply 2i times negative 7i. All right, so the process that I'll go through next is I want to simplify this last term because it contains an I squared. Then once I simplify that, all we're really going to do is combine the real terms together and then the imaginary terms together. So remember, I squared is equal to negative 1. So we're going to replace I squared with negative 1. So I'm going to rewrite the whole problem down here. Negative 24 plus 56i plus 8i. Those haven't changed yet. Now negative 14 times negative 1 is positive 14. So remember, I placed I squared with negative 1, and that's what this simplifies to. So again, now we're going to go through and combine our real parts together. So we add negative 24 and 14, we get negative 10. And then we're going to combine the imaginary parts. So 56i and 8i, that gives us positive 64i. And this is in the proper form because we have the real part first, followed by the imaginary part. So it looks like we are good to go. All right, one final example to go through, and this one again is very similar to the one that we just did, where we're going to use that FOIL pattern to multiply this out. So let's go ahead. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times negative 2i is negative 6i. Negative 4i times 5 is negative 20i. And then negative 4i times negative 2i is positive 8i squared. Okay, same process as before. So here, remember, we have positive 8i squared. We're going to replace I squared with negative 1. And then I'm going to rewrite this below. So we have 15, which remains the same. Negative 6i remains the same. Negative 20i remains the same. And now we're going to replace 8i squared with negative 8, because 8 times negative 1 is negative 8. So again, we're back to combining the real parts together. So 15 plus negative 8, or 15 minus 8, is positive 7. And then we're going to combine the imaginary parts together. So negative 6i and negative 20i is negative 26i. Okay, so again, these are just a few examples of how we would add complex numbers, subtract complex numbers, and also multiply complex numbers. I hope this video was helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.